It's Miss Ralph, and I'm here to talk to you today about my absolute favorite thing in the entire world, poetry. And I'm going to introduce you to a method of poetry analysis that I developed myself called PITT. It is a version of TPcast, which you might have learned last year, but I think it's a little too long and complicated, and so I have made it easier for you. Okay, one of the biggest complaints I hear in my life that breaks my heart is I don't get poems. This is something I get from both students and adults about poetry. My friends even tell me that. I have heard fellow English teachers even say it. Maybe not the ones at Bowie, but in my career, some fellow English teachers have told me that they are nervous about poetry. So I'm going to walk you through a method that'll kind of help you understand poetry better. And usually we do shared inquiry where we FIDS things, and we are going to do that again with poetry, but it is a two-step process. Okay, so here is a graphic organizer that you're going to use later, and it basically helps you infer a deeper meaning, okay? So it's 4 steps, and we're going to go through them. And of course, here is Brad Pitt in the corner to decorate your graphic organizer. All right, the first thing you got to do is paraphrase. In TPcast, some teachers make you do every single line, and if it's a short poem, I would do that. But for most poems, you can get away with putting each stanza of the poem in your own words, okay? So basically, you just say literally, and I mean literally, not the way that you guys mean it. When you say, I literally died, which means you figuratively died. I want you to put the literal meaning of the poem in your own words. Okay, so you're just saying what's happening. You're not making any inferences. You're not going to try to figure out if the whole thing is a big symbol for death or a metaphor for man's inhumanity to man. You're literally just going to find what's happening in the poem. Step 2. This is the part where you're going to FIDS the poem, okay? You're going to look at the imagery and the figurative language, and then you're going to make inferences. So usually what I like to do is read the poem through once, then kind of highlight the imagery, and then try to make images. So a lot inferences based on the images, sorry. A lot of people think that they don't think about poetry this way. And I like to think about poems as pictures. Like they're made up of images, which are like snapshots or photographs. And you kind of have to guess what's going on based on the pictures being presented in the poem. For example, look at this paparazzi photo. You see Brad Pitt and Angelina with this child on the beach. They look like they're having a fun family day. But oh, snap, that is not his wife. Okay, he was married to somebody else at the time. And I infer from this photo that, I don't know, if I was his wife, I wouldn't be happy. Okay, moving on. Step 3. This is where you look for the speaker's attitude in the poem or to determine the tone, okay? And you find tone based on word choice. Okay, the words that are in the poem, also known as diction, which you know from your FID studying earlier. Also, poems often have a shift in tone. They start off one way and they end up another way. A great example of that I'm going to show you in just a moment. As you can see, the words on here about Brad Pitt, you can infer how the author feels about Brad Pitt. And I know it's kind of hard to see on this video, but it says, an extraordinary interview with the world's greatest actor. The words extraordinary and greatest lead me to believe that the author loves Brad Pitt. Okay, so we're going to look at a beautiful poem by Naomi Nye called Kindness. So I'm going to let her read it to you because she reads it a lot better than me. And she's going to read the entire poem, and then I'm going to show you how to use PITT for the first stanza.
I wrote Kindness. I actually was the secretary for Kindness. after my husband and I were robbed of everything on our honeymoon long, long ago. And it was a rather desperate situation. Someone on the same bus with us was murdered. So we didn't get the worst brunt of the evening, but it was rough. And what to do next? This was in the pre-cell phone day and pre-internet day. And we didn't want to call home because we were in South America on our honeymoon. And everybody had told us we were crazy to attempt to do what we were going to try to do, which was foiled after a week because we had nothing. So we were going to try to go from the top of South America to the bottom by bus. And a man came up to us and was very kind. And afterwards just spoke to us and was kind. And so afterwards I was trembling. I was very, very anxious. And I just sat. The only thing I had left was a little tiny notebook and a pencil that had been in my back pocket. And I sat in a public plaza in Popayan. And this poem was spoken out of the air to me, and I just copied it down. Kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. He too was someone who journeyed through that night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend.
Okay, and I'm going to stop her there because she's going to basically tell you what the whole thing is about, and I don't want that. Okay, so let's look at the first stanza. It says, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. So I highlighted that yellow because this is figurative language. It's a simile. So I'm going to mark that as a simile. And then I'm going to make an inference about the simile. So if the future can dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth, well, I'm going to infer that that means our futures are uncertain, right? And can change in an instant. Like hers did when she was kind of robbed on that bus. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen to you, but you know? And so she goes on to explain what you held in your hand and what you counted and carefully saved. I mean, this is also figurative, and you could kind of highlight that yellow because it's not literal. And I forgot to do it the first time I read it. So good thing I looked it over, finding more stuff. This is, you know, figurative. It's not any kind of figurative language. It's just figurative. And it's talking about plans, I think, talking about plans and what people think is important, right? It's like all the things in our life that we think are important that we plan for. Oops, Miss Rolfe can't spell. There you go. Thank you, Google. All right. All of this must go so you can know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. Well, this is comparing kind of life and our awareness to a desolate landscape. It's also kind of imagery too, right? I'm going to say it's imagery too. And oops, Miss Rolfe really can't spell today. Okay. And it shows that, so what I infer about this part is that she's saying, so you can know, so that when we lose things, we realize what's important in life. And that's an idea that's going to happen throughout the poem. Okay, and then finally, how you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. This is imagery, but it's also figurative because that's a hyperbole, right? She's exaggerating. Okay. And I think, you know, she's just using an exaggeration there. So that's how you kind of highlight the FIDs and the imagery. And obviously, I've made some really important inferences based on this, right? Our futures are uncertain. And when we lose things, we kind of realize what's important. Like we realize what kindness really is. Okay. And in order to do that, we have to lose some of the things we care about. So that's kind of what she's saying there. All right, so that is basically kind of how PITT works in action. And now that you've seen it sort of as a preview, we're going to do it with some poems today that relate to origin stories. But I want you to think for a minute right now and enter it in the play posit answer. How does this poem relate to our persuasive prompt that we did you know, just a couple of days ago? We're just finishing those essays now. So write a little bit about how this relates based on the first stanza and what you heard in the poem. How does it relate to our persuasive prompt?